All right, so we are here with our NFL Week 17 predictions. Now we are getting down to the final 2 weeks of this NFL season. We're getting close to the playoffs. The AFC, the playoff picture, still an absolutely and complete mess. One team have clinched the playoffs, that being the Chiefs. They won their division last week. The NFC, the top 5 seeds, are kind of just battling out to see where they're going to be placed in the playoff picture. There's still 2 seeds remaining. So the NFC, kind of a clear picture. The AFC, still an absolute mess. So let's get into NFL Week 17 predictions. Last week I went 12-4, having a very good week last week. Overall, I think I've done fairly solid this year. So let's get into these games. The first game of the week we have is the Giants and the Bears. Now, last week the Giants announced they're bringing back Joe Judge and Daniel Jones. Makes absolutely no sense to me. They are doing nothing well to help this Giants franchise who's been a joke basically since Eli Manning has left. Mike Glennon, Jake Fromm, just the Giants as a whole. Very bad game last week. They fell apart completely in the second half. The Bears, however, they had a fairly good win against the Seahawks. Nick Foles came in, stepped up for the Bears, won on a really sweet 2-point conversion play. They do have a very good defense, in my opinion, which is why I'm picking the Bears, because at least in Chicago, you have something you can hang your hat on, and the fact that you have a very, very good defense. Next, we have the Jaguars and the Patriots. Now, the Jaguars did lose to the Jets, and at this point, the Jaguars should just lose out, get the number 1 overall pick again, because their season is going absolutely nowhere, and they have nothing to fight for the rest of the season. The Patriots, however, they still have a lot to fight for. They're fighting for their division. They're fighting for a playoff spot still, because as I mentioned, the AFC playoff picture is just a complete mess, and nobody knows what's going on. But the Patriots, they are on a 2-game losing streak. Mac Jones and the defense haven't looked particularly well the last few weeks. They didn't look good against the Bills or the Colts the last couple weeks. Their defense, as I mentioned, isn't stopping the run as well as they have. They allowed Josh Allen to have a really good game last week. Isaiah McKenzie had a good game last week against the Patriots. But I think the Patriots playing the Jaguars, this is a perfect spot for the Patriots to get right, have a really good game, and I think the Patriots will beat the Jaguars. Next, we have the Rams and the Ravens. Now, the Rams, they are another team that haven't looked particularly well the last few weeks. They're just on the winning side of things. Stafford last week, 3 interceptions, did not look good. Sony Michel, though, is a very bright spot on the Rams offense, who has kind of struggled the last few weeks. They also do get Cam Akers back, so that's going to be a huge boost for them. You look at the Ravens, though. Lamar Jackson was back at practice this week. I assume he's going to play. He's a tough guy. He's a fighter. He's going to want to play. Their defense, very injured last week. The Ravens didn't look good at all against the Bengals last week. 525 yards passing. Again, I know they're beat up, but they don't look particularly well. Their offense, I think they missed Lamar Jackson. Just as a whole, the Ravens haven't had a particularly good season. I think it's been a very disappointing season for them. Just as a whole, I think the Rams are going to win this game just for the fact that their defense, they have Von Miller, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey. I think those are three of the best defensive players in football. And they're really, the Ravens, for how beat up they are, Lamar Jackson, even if he does play, he is beat up. So I think even with that, it's going to be a tough game for the Ravens. And I think the Rams win this. And the Rams really want to win their division. So they're going to be a little bit extra hungry in this game to get the W. Next, we have the Buccaneers and the Jets. Now, the Buccaneers, they beat the Panthers last week. They do have a ton of injuries, but they were able to get the victory with all those injuries. The Jets, however, they beat the Jaguars last week, and Zach Wilson is finally showing some progression where he looks like he's finally improving. I think that comes to a complete halt this week. I still think the Buccaneers have a very solid defense, even with the guys out. That front of the defense for the Buccaneers is very good. I think it's going to give the Jets troubles the entire game. Tom Brady is still going to play very well. They still have Gronk. They still have Antonio Brown. So I think just as a whole, at least for this week, the Buccaneers will be fine, and I think the Buccaneers beat the Jets. Next, we have the Falcons and the Bills. Now, the Falcons nearly fumbled it away against the Lions. So the Falcons, just as a whole, they're not a very good football team. Now, the Bills, on the other hand, they finally got right, finally looked like the team that we knew from last year. They against a Patriots team who is a very tough team, and they just made the Patriots look really bad last week. And Josh Allen stepped up huge last week, having a great game, making some insanely good throws, running with his legs. He was being a complete playmaker last week. Isaiah McKenzie stepped up, huge day. The defense is great, and I think the Bills will probably cruise past the Falcons because the Falcons stink. They have a terrible defense. and I think the Bills win in a very convincing fashion. Next, we have the Chiefs and the Bengals. Now, this game has game of the year potential just because of how explosive these two offenses can be. Chiefs last week completely decimated the Steelers, dominated them. Defense dominant. And they do get Travis Kelce back for this week. Joe Burrow for the Bengals, 525 yards passing last week. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, massive games. Now, the problem with the Bengals and the reason why I'm not picking them is because they're a very hot and cold team. They will blow a team out themselves one week, then they'll get blown out themselves, or they'll only score 15 points. I think that's a problem with the Bengals team, especially against a very hot Chiefs team where the defense has been one of the best, if not the best in football for the past few weeks. The Chiefs are on an 8-game winning streak, and just because of that alone, I think because the Bengals are hot and cold, they had their massive game last week. I think the Chiefs get the victory over the Bengals. Next, we have the Dolphins and the Titans. Now, this game a few weeks ago looked like an absolute snooze fest, but the Dolphins, they are on a 7-game winning streak. Their defense last week was just dominant against the Saints. 8 sacks, just a straight-up dominating performance. They have Mike Gesicki and Jalen Waddle, two probably top 10 players at those positions in the NFL right now, both playing really good football. Tua making a few plays here and there. They're not really winning because of Tua. Their defense has just been so dominant. Titans, they finally looked good last week. They had an awesome second half against the 49ers. A.J. Brown was elite, came alive, took over the second half. Now, this is going to be a biased pick that I'm doing. I'm picking the Dolphins for 2 reasons. One, that defense I think is not something you want to mess with at this time of the season. They are a very hot defense who's playing well, and they're on a 7-game winning streak. And for another reason, I need the Titans to lose this game. I do, because if the Chiefs can beat the Bengals and the Dolphins can beat the Titans, then that means the Chiefs are the number 1 seed in the AFC. And for that fact alone, I'm rooting for the Dolphins 2 weeks in a row. Next game we have is the Raiders and the Colts. Now, the Raiders defense looked particularly well last week against the Denver Broncos. Josh Jacobs on the offense ran the ball pretty well, and then, like I said, the defense was pretty good. The Colts, however, have been a very good football team, a very dangerous football team as of late. Carson Wentz, because of the new NFL protocol, should be back for this game after testing positive earlier in the week. They've had 2 great wins back-to-back against the Patriots and now the Cardinals. And when Jonathan Taylor runs for over 100 yards, this team is undefeated. They clinch a playoff spot with a win. I think this Colts team is very hungry. They want to just prove that they're a very good football team. I think Carson Wentz wants to go out there, have a massive game, and play a great game. And I think the Colts will beat the Raiders. Next, we have the Eagles and the Washington football team. Now, the Eagles are in a playoff spot currently, so they're very much in this for the NFC playoff spot. And they came alive in the second half last week against the Giants. I believe they scored 31 points. Jalen Hurts has actually had a pretty good season. He's slowly progressed throwing the football each week. He can run with his legs. So I think the Eagles offensively are a very good running football team. The Washington football team, however, I think they stink. They got completely decimated and destroyed by the Cowboys last week. They gave up 56 points. They had players fighting on the sidelines. I think the Washington football team is just going downhill in the worst possible way. And I think because the Eagles, they're a hungry football team. They're actually kind of a hot football team if you think about it. They're playing really well. So I think the Eagles get this win and they stay in a playoff spot. Next, we have the Broncos and the Chargers. Now, as we mentioned, the Broncos lost to the Raiders last week. Their offense absolutely stinks. Drew Lock looked terrible. This offense is one of the worst offenses just to watch in football. They can't move the ball. They don't look good doing anything. It's so boring, and it's just so painful to watch the Broncos offense. The Chargers, on the other hand, they lost to the Texans last week. They've lost 2 in a row to the Chiefs and now the Texans. They really need this game, and they need this game in the worst way possible. They're not currently in a playoff spot. They want to make a playoff spot. If they don't make the playoffs, this would be a completely wasted season. Brandon Staley has shown that he's a very good head coach. Justin Herbert, I'm a huge fan of. Now, last week they were without some of their key players, but I think they need this win badly. Their defense has been very disappointing this season, not very good at all. And I think just simply for the fact that the Chargers are a hungry and they want to win this game badly, and because the Broncos beat the Chargers earlier this season, I think the Chargers get their revenge. They beat the Broncos they could keep their playoff hopes alive, because if the Chargers do not make the playoffs, I think this will be a completely wasted season, a fairly solid season at times, but I think it would be a big wasted season if the Chargers do not make the playoffs. But I do have the Chargers beating the Broncos. Next, we have the Texans and the 49ers. As we just mentioned, the Texans did beat the Chargers. Davis Mills actually has had a very good season. If I'm the Texans, I actually might consider building around him for next year, because he has been very competent in the position that he is in this year while he's been the starting quarterback. The 49ers, though, they're in a pretty tough spot. I think they're still currently in a playoff spot, but that loss last week to the Titans wasn't what they wanted, because last week they kind of were still in the hopes for their division. Now they're kind of just, they need to win out so they can make the playoffs. So I think the 49ers, I think the 49ers do win this game, though. Jimmy G is injured. There is a chance that Trey Lance might start this game. It's kind of still up in the air who will play. But just because the run defense of the Texans isn't particularly well, I think the 49ers are hungry. They want to win this game. And because Jimmy G, if he does play, he might have an edge because of that tweet that John Lynch liked earlier this week, which was kind of funny. I'm not going to lie. What a way to ruin Christmas for somebody. But I think the 49ers, they are obviously a better team. Their defense is much better than the Chargers. So I think the 49ers will beat the Texans. Next, we have the Lions and the Seahawks. This game literally does not matter. Nobody cares about this. The Lions nearly beat the Falcons. They got a late fumble. Tim Boyle threw an interception. Seahawks, they lost to the Bears. However, I just think the Seahawks, and because the Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson era is about to come to an end, I think they want to go out with a bang, and I think the Seahawks will beat the Lions. Next, we have the Cardinals and the Cowboys. Now, the Cardinals, they are on a 3-game losing streak. They haven't looked particularly well the last few weeks. They are in an uphill climb in their division. However, they have already clinched a playoff spot, so they do have that going for them. Kyler Murray, as much as how poorly he has been playing the last few weeks, how bad the Cardinals have been the last few weeks, I still think he's a really good quarterback. I still think he can make some unbelievable plays. I still think he's a really good quarterback. He can move. There was a play last week where he was just trucking along. He was moving. The Cowboys, though, they had a complete beatdown of the Washington football team. It was like 56-14. Dak had over 300 yards in just the first half alone. I think he had 4 touchdown passes in the first half. That was a dominating performance by the Cowboys. They have an elite defense. And for that alone, I think the Cowboys will get this game. The Cowboys were off for a few weeks. Like, their offense did not look particularly well. They were getting carried by their defense. Their offense finally looked good again. Their defense was hitting on the same page. Their special teams was hitting on the same page last week. All 3 phases of that game looked completely dominant last week. And for that alone, and because the Cowboys finally got some momentum behind them, I think the Cowboys will beat the Cardinals. Next, we have the Panthers and the Saints. Again, another game that nobody really cares about. I mean, there's really no implications really for this game whatsoever. The Panthers, they kind of got blown out by the Bucs. They are starting Sam Darnold this week. The Saints, they got dominated by the Dolphins. Ian Brook didn't have a particularly good game whatsoever. However, I did read that Taysom Hill and Trevor Siemian were activated for the Saints. It still doesn't change my gut feeling that I think the Panthers are going to win this game. I can't tell you why. This game's going to stink. This game does not matter, but I think the Panthers will beat the Saints. Next, we have the Vikings and the Packers. Now, the Vikings beat the Packers in the first matchup, so there is that the Vikings can lean their hat on. But the Vikings, they lost last week to the Rams. They were able to force 3 interceptions. They really weren't able to do much with it. If they had a competent special teams, didn't give up that punt return for a touchdown, to be honest, the Vikings honestly could have stayed in that game and won that game for how poorly the Rams are playing in that game. They do get Dalvin Cook back, but again, the Vikings, they have chances to win games and they just don't take them, and they just don't look good when in games whatsoever. You have the Packers. They did hold on to beat the Browns. They haven't been particularly well the last 2 weeks either. They are winning their games. They kept the game close against the Ravens, and then they kept the game close against the Browns. Their defense has a lot of work to do. They did force 4 interceptions, but their run defense has been pretty bad, was pretty bad last week. Their offense hasn't looked particularly well in the second half of either one of these last 2 games. They're allowing opponents to get back into games. That's not something you want to do close to playoff time. However, I think the Packers, knowing what everybody's saying about them, the fact that they're having issues closing out games the last few weeks, and the fact that they're playing Kirk Cousins and the Vikings on prime time, I think it is safe to say that the Packers will beat the Vikings. And in the final game of the week, we have the Browns and the Steelers. Now, the Browns, as we mentioned, Baker looked really bad, 4 interceptions. However, they still do have a very solid defense. The defense was able to get the Packers offense off the field, keep them in that game. The Steelers, look, there's nothing good about the Steelers. They look bad against the Chiefs. Now, this is more than likely Big Ben's final home game, and just for that reason alone, I think the Steelers will win this game. There's no mere reason for me to pick the Steelers to win this game whatsoever, but the simple fact that this is Big Ben's final home game, he's going to want to go out with a bang. The Steelers are going to do everything they can to help him win this game. I think the Steelers will win this game for Big Ben. They'll fight as hard as they can for Big Ben. Again, there's absolutely no reason why I should be picking the Steelers to win this game. But again, I guess if we want to go to the Brown side of the football, I don't like Baker Mayfield. I think he stinks. But I'm going with the Steelers to win this and Big Ben's possible and more than likely final home game for the Steelers. Those are my NFL Week 17 predictions. Give me your predictions down below, and I will see you in the next one.